Hello and welcome back to the ROKER Report Extra podcast. It's me again. Sorry to disappoint. Actually, no, I didn't disappoint last week. You all liked the podcast last week because I shut my mouth. I do take criticism in a very constructive way, so I'm going to try and do the same again this week. But before I do that, obviously, we're coming in on the back of another draw, this time to Fleetwood. Wasn't the most impressive performance, I don't think, but again, we showed that fighting spirit to pull it back for the fifth time this season. But we need to stop conceding so early and giving ourselves such a battle, if I'm honest with you. We're away from home this week after sort of 2 home games in a row. We've got Burton, who were a team that up until last season I had no idea about. I think this season is probably one of the teams I know a little bit about. And to fill us in on the changes they've had, which has been a lot, I'm led to believe, I've got Josh Murray from the Burton Mail. How are you doing, Josh? You well?
I'm very well, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. Probably better than when we would have spoke this time last year, I think. Yeah. How's relegation working out for you? It's a little bit different to us, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, it was a pretty sluggish start. I think things are starting to look up for Burton now in the last few weeks, heading into this weekend's game. But yeah, it was. The relegation itself was a dramatic one. You know, they looked dead and buried a couple of weeks before that game up at the Stadium of Light, and then in the end, actually, they were safe until 5 minutes to play on Bolton's amazing recovery. So I think in a way that probably took a bit of getting over. In terms of sort of how the season started, they had a really disrupted pre-season in terms of injuries, and that sort of carried over into the first couple of weeks of the season. They didn't play too badly in their first few games, but they just struggled to get the balance right across the pitch. A couple of defeats. In fact, they'd lost their first 4 of their first 5 league games, which left them, I think, in the bottom 4, and understandably there was a little bit of negativity. The squad size was pretty small at that stage as well, and the injuries hadn't helped. But I think they won. They beat Aston Villa in the Carabao Cup at the end of August, and that feels as if it might have been a bit of a springboard. They went and signed 4 loanees in the few days after that. And since then, they've taken 4 points in the last 2 games of the league. So, it's looking up, and you can see the combinations and everything are just starting to click, and they'll hope to sort of take that into Saturday's game.
And they mentioned, I think it was Jack Ross mentioned in his presser a bit today about the injuries you have. Has that been overplayed? Are you actually not got that many? Is it just a goalkeeping crisis? What's the situation with that at the moment?
No, it's been pretty constant, to be honest. Since, as I say, even in pre-season, there have been injury issues. At the moment, as you mentioned, that the goalkeepers are probably the primary one. Stephen Bywater, the first choice last season, and at the start of this, injured his shoulder against Villa in that cup game. He's out for between sort of 4 to 8 weeks. And then they brought Bradley Collins in from Chelsea on loan. Had a good season with Forest Green last season. Impressed sort of in his first game, and then he did a thigh muscle in his second game. So now Harry Campbell, who's actually been with the club for more than 2 years, but hadn't appeared in those first 2 years, now looks set for his first league start at the weekend against Sunderland. They are Burton sort of looking at potential sort of emergency loans for a goalkeeper or unattached goalkeepers, but at the moment there hasn't been too much movement. So that is the main one, but there's also at the back they've got quite a few injuries. Jake Buxton, John Brayford and Damien McCrory, all sort of senior defenders. They've all been out for a few weeks now and are all doubts for the weekend. Further forward, they're looking better. They've got plenty of options sort of upfield and in midfield, but it has been primarily in defence where their injuries have been. In fact, the AFC Wimbledon game where they won 3-0, they only had really one sort of senior defender in Lucas Akins, who's primarily a forward. He was at centre-back. They got Ben Fox, a young midfielder, at right-back, and Reece Hutchinson, an 18-year-old, in his first season at left-back. So that sort of shows where the defensive issues have hit, really.
Yeah, you mentioned a few players there, and I'm pretty certain that whole defensive lineup of injuries you have, I think they were like your first team last year, give or take, maybe. Funnily enough, we quite like Tom Flanagan, who I'm sure we'll come on to, but he actually didn't really get in the team last year, did he? Too much. He was in and out.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was sort of an interesting one with Tom, really, because he'd his first season in the Championship when Burton first got there in 2016. He was one of the most consistent performers in the second half of that season, certainly, and he sort of became a bit undroppable, really. And then that summer, he was offered a new contract and initially actually turned that down and sort of looked elsewhere and left the club. But then actually came back and signed a new deal with the club a couple of weeks into the season. And he was pretty regular, but sort of came in and out. He was one who had a couple of injuries. But yeah, there was a little bit of surprise amongst Brewers fans. I think that he was he was sort of put on the transfer list in the summer. Nigel Clough just basically saying they needed to sort of free up some room somewhere, and that was the situation. And yeah, obviously he's likely, I suppose, to come up against Burton this weekend. But certainly so far this season, with the defensive injuries they've been, Flanagan's versatility would have been sort of priceless to Burton.
Were you surprised that he joined Sunderland? Obviously, it's no disrespect to Burton, but obviously I'd never really heard of Tom Flanagan beforehand. So was that a surprise for you to see him go to Sunderland as part of our rebuild?
I don't know whether I was surprised. I mean, I think it's a great move for Tom. I sort of looked at a lot of his interviews and in the immediate aftermath, and it seemed like you could just tell the way he was on the videos that he was sort of relishing the opportunity to play at a club like Sunderland. I think he said like 3 of his best mates is it, a sort of big Sunderland fan, so that I'm sure will have gone down well. I wouldn't say it was necessarily surprising. I mean, as I say, I think it's a good move. He's already been promoted out of League One once. He's got a lot of League One experience, so I can see why Jack Ross might have thought, he's somebody with that know-how in the division. His versatility is, as I say, such a valuable asset. He can play across that back line, and he's even played sort of as a wing back in the past for the Brewers as well. So, I always thought he'd be someone that certainly League One teams would look at and see would be a good asset in the back line. And as you say, Sunderland sort of came in and that was that.
And you talk about, or I'm talking about like our overhaul of players, which naturally had to happen. But I'm looking through Burton's overhaul. It's been just as big. How's that been for you? Like you've lost obviously players like Flanagan. You lost Tom Naylor, who was actually quite close to signing for us. I'm led to believe. Hope Akpan was another player that left. But you brought in like a big turnover of players, and some with good names. David Templeton's in there. I'm reading through Jake Hesketh, Devante Cole. How's the turnover been for you? Like from a club like Burton, who maybe are used to this league more than maybe we are. How has your turnover been with you losing sort of your better players and having to replace them?
I think probably that a little bit of the slow start was down to that. I mean, a lot of those signings, as I say, those 4 loanees, Jake Hesketh and Jake Flanagan from Southampton, Devante Cole from Wigan, and then Bradley Collins, the keeper from Chelsea, they all came in the last 48 hours of the loan window. So, a lot of the business was done quite late. In terms of losing those players, I suppose, not necessarily inevitable, but it was always, with Burton dropping down a division. Nigel Clough spoke about it pretty openly, said, that they might have been in the Championship for 2 years, but they are still one of the smaller League One clubs in many senses. And, somebody like Tom Naylor has obviously looked and said, maybe it's a natural point in his career to move elsewhere. And from what I've heard, he's doing brilliantly for Portsmouth. So, yeah, it was always going to take a little bit of time, I think, for this new look squad to gel. But it looks now as if those new signings, Fraser and Templeton from Scotland, are really hitting their strides now after, taking a bit of time in pre-season. And Stephen Quinn actually is probably the one, former Reading, Hull City midfielder, Republic of Ireland. He basically was, I don't think, that far away from retirement in the summer after leaving Reading. But he'd been training with Burton and they've signed him up on a short-term contract, and I mean he's getting fitter with every game and he looks a really classy operator there, sort of in the holding midfield role. So he could be one of those little gems which sort of came from nowhere and could pay dividends for Burton.
So you were talking about the beginning of the season. I remember because I was at the game when you beat us 2-1 when that bloke Darren Bent, who you may remember, and I certainly do, scored, and I think Liam Boyce got the winner, I believe. Also another, I mean, I live in Glasgow, so I was aware of Liam Boyce with his Ross County sort of links and stuff like that. But I actually thought you'd be kind of there with us in Barnsley, as you naturally do, but the start was really difficult. So although like it's improved, and you've mentioned about players not clicking and injuries and stuff like that, was there more to it than that, or was it just simply down to that? Because I know that Nigel Clough was being questioned from an outside looking in.
I think it was a combination of a lot of things. As I say, part of it was lacking a little bit of depth with all those injuries in the first few weeks. They didn't necessarily have the options to turn to. I mean, they couldn't name a full substitutes bench for quite a few of their early season games, which sums it up a little bit. There were issues as well. As I talk about the balance, in a couple of games they looked really dangerous going forward, but were just far too open at the back. Away at Gillingham when they lost 3-1, Gillingham just got in behind too many times. So I think it was just a few of those things, that needed ironing out a little bit. And Clough had spoken in the summer saying he thought it would take a few weeks for them to be settled. He's spoken this week saying that Sunderland and Barnsley have obviously hit the ground running and Burton haven't. I mean, it was always going to be quite hard, personally, I thought, to predict how this season would go for Burton. Obviously, yes, coming down from the Championship, there's the expectation, and the fact that they won other League One season, they obviously went up automatically. But then on the flip side, this is still only their second ever season at this level. They'd not been relegated in 40 years, so it was a huge experience, a different experience. And as we say, in terms of the club size and whatever, so it was always going to be a difficult one to predict, and I think they needed to turn the slow start around, and they've started to do that, because we've seen, you guys know perfectly well how that sort of negative momentum can fester and it can sort of pick up quite dangerously. So they needed to sort of stop after that early slump, and I think they've done that now. I mean, they're obviously far from suddenly pushing for promotion, but it's still early days, and I think that their target is still to be pushing at the end of the season to try and break back into the Championship if they can.
I mean, it's one of those leagues where you can pick up a few wins and lift yourself up. But I've noticed a lot of your kind of upturn in form, unfortunately for us, has been your home form. Is that coincidence, or have the home fans really made it quite a difficult place to go to in the past few weeks?
Certainly, I think there's a bit of a buzzer's return to the Pirelli, and that, I suppose, it sort of goes hand in hand, doesn't it? Is if you can start getting the results at home, then the atmosphere grows and the fans get more positive, and then that helps the players. So it's sort of a a positive cycle. Whereas last season, when they went on that run of 7 months without a win at home, which was ultimately what led to them being relegated, I think it was the opposite. I think there was a sense. The classic example was the game where you guys sort of came to the Pirelli, and I think it was 0-0 after sort of 80 minutes or so. But there was almost a bit of an inevitability. Burton had a lot of close games at the Pirelli where the away team had always nicked that goal, and in that last 10 minutes, I think there was a bit of a sense of Sunderland are going to get something here, and that happened a lot. The flip side this season, the positivity's back, the belief's there, and the players are thriving on that. So I don't think it's a coincidence, but obviously it's still early doors, and they've got to build on that. The back-to-back promotion seasons, it's a cliche, but they did build it on that home form, and they were so difficult to beat at the Pirelli, and they know that that's going to have to be the case again this season. They've looked it so far, 2 wins and 1 defeat, where really they should have won against Rochdale on the opening day. But this weekend will be the biggest test yet, and if they can get a decent result against Sunderland, then I think there'll be a real belief that they are a tough nut to crack at the Pirelli again.
And I'm looking. One thing I am looking through from the team, I always like to look at statistics. As much as people tell you, sometimes they do lie. I think sometimes they don't tell the full truth, shall we say, anyway. And I'm looking through sort of Burton's team, and you were mentioning before about looking quite good sort of going forward previously. And I remember like last season, if there was players that I knew in the Burton team, it was definitely sort of further upfield, and the same resonates when I look through your list of players like Liam Boyce, Templeton, Sodell. But I've noticed Liam Boyce seems to be on quite a bit of form. And obviously he had that really bad injury last year, which really scuppered him. Does he look like he's back to the form that made him, well, he would have been the top scorer in Scotland, I think, when you signed him? Yeah,
bang on. Yeah, that's exactly it. I think there's still, even months and months on, still a bit of frustration from the Burton perspective of looking at Boyce now and how he is and thinking, if he didn't do his ACL, before the season even begun last season, would they have gone down, or would he have been enough to keep them up? And I think the general consensus is, his class in front of goal would probably have been enough to grab a few vital points for Burton last season. But it is what it is. As you say, it was an awful injury for him. He battled back brilliantly. He was, I think he was back a lot sooner than people anticipated. But it also took him time on the pitch to get up to full fitness. I think we started to see that in the last few weeks, of the season. Obviously, he got, as you say, scored that goal against Sunderland up at the Stadium of Light. But he's certainly hit the ground running this season. He's 5 goals, I think, in 8 games in all competitions. But it's not just his ability in front of goal, although that's clear. He doesn't need many chances to find the net. It's his all-round play. Burton's style of play is built around him. He sort of leads the line. He allows the wide players to get forward. He allows the midfield runners to run onto the ball. He'll sort of hold it up and feed them in. He's absolutely crucial to what they do, and they've proved, as you say, why they signed him in the first place from Ross County. And and now they've sort of proven the value he's got, and he's going to be absolutely pivotal if they are going to sort of stage a promotion push. Then his goals and his all-round play are going to play a huge part.
And I think he's he was basically all of your budget last year as well, wasn't he? Which is definitely that must be awful when you spend, I think, what was it, 500,000? I think you spent on him, which is pretty much the budget.
I understand, yeah. I mean,
then you get injured.
Yeah. I mean, it was one of those. I was at the friendly at Shrewsbury Town. It was, and it was one of those innocuous ones in midfield where he tried to hold the ball up and then twist, and I think his studs just got stuck in the turf, and immediately, don't you, with those serious injuries, and there was just this sense, you look down at the management at the bench, and that they were looking at each other thinking, surely not, and obviously, it came back that it was the ACL, and I mean that. In a way, I don't want to say it defined the season because there were plenty of other issues, as we say, that home form, 7 months without a win. But if he had played 35, 40 games last season with the goals he's scoring at the moment, and as we say, his all-round contributions, Burton would have been a different team. They looked to replace him and play in different ways last season. But I remember those early pre-season games before the season, that it was clear that in the Championship as well, they were building a team around him and building a style of play around him. And then, as you say, for that to go up in smoke before you've even kicked the ball in anger is hugely frustrating. But they couldn't dwell on it, and they certainly can't dwell on it after relegation and in League One. Now they are getting the benefits of him, albeit a season later than they'd have wanted. But I also get the sense from Boyce himself that he's relishing the chance. Imagine how frustrated he'll have been. He makes a big move down to England for the first time, trying to make a name for himself in the Championship, and then he gets that injury, and he's been so determined in his route back into fitness, and he's got a point to prove now in League One, and don't forget, he's a Northern Ireland international as well. He wants to try and stake a claim to be a regular starter for them, so he's got plenty to prove, and I'd say so far he's doing it.
One thing I really wanted to touch on, and it's maybe a question that's maybe more related to my mindset with Sunderland. Anyone who knows our recent history will know how many different managers we've had in such a short space of time. There's really been no continuity. Obviously, we've since changed ownership. I would like to think Jack Ross will be given a really good opportunity to sort of turn this around. And he'll be given patience, even if, and I don't even want to think about it, but I would say we don't go up, or if the season doesn't go as planned, I would still hope he'd be allowed to build a team, because it seems like that's what he's doing. A club like Burton Albion, I mean, Nigel Clough's been there twice. Obviously, he left temporarily, but he's been there. I mean, he was there from 98 till 2009, came back in 2015, I think it was. I feel like I can't answer this question myself. From a Burton perspective, a club that's been promoted twice, you've also been relegated, you've been through some sticky patches, there's been some questions asked this season. But what do you feel the benefit of having Nigel Clough there for that long, or having a manager there for as long as you have? What kind of benefit can that give a club? And how do you think that could have been very different if you'd chopped and changed managers the ways we had?
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, it's impossible to know where Burton would have been if, as you say, they'd have had that approach where they wanted to change managers regularly, and whenever anything sort of started to go wrong, they did. Chairman Ben Robinson has played a massive role in them sort of getting to where they are in such a short space of time, and he runs the club sort of sensibly, sustainably, and takes that approach to managers as well. He wants to give them time. Gary Rowett and Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank, gave them, and Nigel Clough indeed, back in the non-league days, he's given them all their first jobs in management, and they've obviously all progressed from there. But in terms of Clough, and since he came back, again, it's just that stability. I think it's for players, it's knowing what you're going to get, knowing that you've got a manager who has got a game plan and has got faith in you, and there's going to be a consistency and a continuity there. So that, I think, in itself is hugely important. And also, it's shown, I think, in the way things have gone. Last season, okay, as you say, there were tough times and the relegation happened, and it might have been that at other clubs changes would have been made, but Burton's approach and Ben Robinson's approach has always been about that stability and about showing faith. And he always knew with Clough that if they got relegated, that they would still look to sort of solidify and bounce back in League One, and obviously that's the aim at the minute.
And I feel like this is a really silly question to ask because we all know about Brian Clough, the manager, but I feel like Nigel Clough's vastly different in his approach, even though he's looking more and more like his dad, like every single week. But what is Nigel Clough as a manager? What does he personally bring to the team? Because I feel like his management style, as long as he's been in the game, I'll be honest, I don't know a great deal, and I feel like I really should, especially considering he's a Sunderland born, and his dad. But I mean, he seems to be a bit more of a calmer version of his dad, doesn't he? A little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a sense he's done sort of, similar jobs at clubs. Okay, the Burton one, obviously, in the first place was a completely different one. Going into a club in the Northern Premier League as they were, and taking them to the verge of the Football League. But then obviously, he went to Derby, where his primary task was to sort of manage the club's sustain them in the Championship while cutting a wage bill and everything else that was coming from the Premier League days. And then at Sheffield United, they looked like they were heading out of League One, and he sort of turned them around sort of reasonably quickly and sensibly, and got them to 2 cup semi-finals and to the playoffs. Back at Burton, it was again another different job. It was about managing resources in the champion. Managing Burton Albion in the Championship is such a unique sort of story and situation that, again, it took a certain type of manager who can work with limited budget, with resources, and manage those resources well. So I think that's one thing he's proven is being able to manage resources well and get the best out of a group of players. Certainly is what he's sort of done at Burton. It's a lot down to man management. I think, when you talk to players about him, it's that style. He knows how to I think, deal with certain players or different players in different ways. So I think that's what it's down to as well. And he does I think like to have a style of football, and to have his team stick to that style. And I think, sort of looking at Burton now, again with Liam Boyce, I think he does like to have a focal point in attack. I think back to the Derby County team, which reached the playoff final in 2013-14. Okay, admittedly, that was under Steve McLaren, but Clough had built that team to sort of have Chris Martin as their focal point, to have dynamic midfielders running forward. Craig Bryson, as it was at Derby. At Burton, he's had Jackson Irvine in the past. Now it's sort of Scott Fraser and players like that. So I think that's a style that he quite likes as well. But as with any manager, to an extent, you have to be adaptable.
Changing the subject ever so slightly, that kind of just came up to me because I obviously everyone loves Brian Clough, and I feel like Nigel doesn't get spoken about very much, which is a bit of a shame because he's had a quite a good career. It's still quite a young career as well, realistically. I think he started very early, but looking at sort of your past few results that you've definitely picked up. I'm looking at obviously the lineup for the last game. You've got Templeton and Sordell on either side. For those of us who don't know, I know a little bit. But how do Burton set up, and how was it different to last year, if at all? And what are we likely to see on Saturday? Are you going to come at us, or are you more likely to sit and maybe hit us on the break, or because a lot of teams have come at us this season? Yeah. And although we haven't lost this season, that has caught us out quite a bit. Do you think Clough will try and capitalize on that?
I would imagine. They'll try and get at them from the first minute. I mean, in terms of a setup, they've favoured a 4-3-3, which they sort of came upon towards the end of last season, but they've stuck with at the start of this, where they're sort of playing a holding midfielder who's been, as we say in the recent weeks, Stephen Quinn, and then 2 other sort of central midfielders further forward. They're the ones who link up with Boyce and sort of push on. And then, as you say, Templeton and Sordell as those wide forwards. The play tends to go through Boyce, but also they play pretty quickly through the middle. And there's been a good pace to the way they've played recently as well. You can see players the combinations are starting to click. Fitness is growing. And that's obviously all positive. In terms of how they'll approach this weekend, I think it'll be the same sort of setup. And I think, they've tried to take the games to teams. Saturday away at Accrington Stanley, the first half an hour or so, they could have had 2 or 3 goals easily. They took an early lead and they tried to build on that. And in the end, it was actually the way they managed the game late on that cost them, and they drew in the end. I think they'll know that obviously Sunderland have been susceptible to early goals and going behind. And probably they'll also not want to find out what Sunderland could do if they get in front. So I'm sure they'll sort of try to race out the blocks. But they've got to be sensible as well. They've still got to have that balance throughout, which as I mentioned, certainly in those early weeks, they struggled to find that balance. They seem to have got that now across the field, in that they're not leaving themselves as open at the back. But they've got to continue. You know, say Josh Major's got what five goals already this season. They know about the threats that Sunderland will carry. I mean, I've seen Jack Ross has suggested he might even throw Aidan McGeady in sort of straight. You know, I know he's been out injured, but and you know the quality that a player that he's got. So Burton have got to get that balance bang on this weekend. Stephen Quinn, as I already mentioned, has got a huge part to play in that holding midfield role, because he sort of screens the defence, breaks play up for the opposing team, and then sets Burton on the front foot.
And with Stephen Quinn as well, he'll most likely be up against George Honeyman, who's been, in my opinion, I'm a fan, a little bit off colour the past few weeks. It's very small. Obviously, he's our captain as well. And you mentioned, obviously, Stephen Quinn playing very well. That could potentially be sort of a key battle, I would imagine, because I think a lot of our play goes through sort of Gooch, Honeyman, and then obviously on the left you've got Maguire. But Maguire and Honeyman have been a little bit off form. Is there anyone from the outside looking in that you do fear from the Sunderland side? That you mentioned Josh Major before, but in a weird way, he scored 5, and yet there's people still kind of want Charlie White to play, I think. And Jerome Sinclair may come in on the left-hand side in place of Maguire this weekend. We're not sure. He's looked good when he's came on, and Maguire looks a little bit off colour the past few weeks. But from the outside looking in, we're unbeaten. Is there anyone that you sort of fear?
I think, like you say, first things first is the fact that Sunderland being unbeaten after 7 games, while people seem to be saying that they've not really hit their stride yet. You know, they've not found top form. They've fallen behind in 5 of the 7 games. I think that in itself is a bit of a statement, and you know, Burton will know about that and be looking at that. I mean, as you say, you know, Maggie, you've got to be wary of the goals, but I think, you know, I don't know if, as you say, Charlie Wyke is likely to start, but I think a player like that with that League One experience, you know, Clough goes on a lot about experience at certain levels, experience of divisions, and knowing, you know, the know-how. And obviously Charlie Wyke has got that in League One and has proven that sort of that goal scoring ability. And Burton, again, you know, you talk about the goalkeeping situation, the defensive injuries, you know, they've looked pretty solid defensively the last couple of games, but you still accept that that's a defence that's there's some inexperience in there, not necessarily at centre half, but down the wings as well. So they've got to be careful there about not being exposed. You know, again, you mentioned somebody like a Jerome Sinclair, if he comes in, or even a McGeady if he is fit enough. You know, those wide threats, Burton are going to have to manage those because they've got inexperienced fullbacks at the moment. So that's what it's going to come down to. You know, at the other end, they know plenty about John McLaughlin in the Sunderland goal. Obviously, you know, he was part of the back-to-back promotions and in the Championship with Burton. So they'll know about his shot-stopping ability, and probably as well, from what's happened so far, that they've got to try and thrive at set pieces. I think that's been where Sunderland have struggled, from what I can tell, conceding those early goals.
Very much so.
So, you know, that's going to be an area that they'll try to exploit. I mean, they tend to be pretty consistent in how they go with sort of set pieces. They try and get the ball onto the head of Ben Turner, the big centre half, and for him to then sort of flick it back into the danger area. And I'm sure that's sort of something they'll have been working on this week.
And it's funny you mentioned about John McLaughlin. Completely skipped my mind that he was part of your promotion team, and then obviously went on to Hearts and had a really good season. There's a bit of a very small amount of debate about John McLaughlin at the moment. I don't think it's been shouted about too loud, but he has looked a little bit suspect on crosses, and yet at the same time, compared to what we had last season, he's like the best goalkeeper ever. Because last season we had 3 absolute. Well, Lee Camp's the worst goalkeeper I've ever seen in my life. I don't even know why he exists as a goalkeeper, because he's terrible. But Reuter was no better, and Jason Seal was a complete joke as well. So he looks so much better than those. But I suppose if you're watching it and taking away last season, he has looked a little bit suspect on crosses. Was he like that in your experience, or is he a solid number 1 goalkeeper for a League One promotion push, which obviously he'd done with Burton?
I'd certainly say, yeah, he is that without a shadow of a doubt. But yeah, I mean, when I think back to watching McLaughlin, there's no 2 ways about it. He's a brilliant sort of shot stopper. If you get time, go watch. I think it's the highlight. I think Swindon Town. Burton beat Swindon at home, December 2015. If you can dig the highlights out, he makes 2 incredible saves in that game. But the second of them, you know, the ball's played across the face of goal, and the striker goes to knock it in from all of about 3 yards, and McLaughlin just defies physics almost to manage to get back and flick it up over the bar. It's one of the best saves I've ever seen. So, he was a brilliant shot stopper for Burton. I do think there was some debate about the way he commanded his box from crosses and stuff like that. That probably potentially was an area where he was seen as slightly as a weaker side of his game. So potentially that's something, as you say, in the first weeks at Sunderland that's bearing a bit of fruit as well. But in terms of a League One promotion push, he was a crucial cog in that. He kept 22 clean sheets the year Burton went up. Okay, a lot of that was also down to a really solid defence, but he certainly played his part, and he was part of the team that stayed up in the Championship as well. So one thing's for certain, he will get a great reception back at the Pirelli this weekend. But I'm sure, as you say, Burton will have tried to work out those potential weaknesses. They'll know him very well, and if it is that, okay, we'll try and pepper the box with crosses and free kicks and whatever, and just try and test that out, then they'll probably be up for doing that.
And I mentioned before about Liam Boyce. I've also mentioned, if there's any particular players you fear from us. I kind of feel like I know you may be saying Liam Boyce here, and he's the obvious answer. But aside from Liam Boyce, who should Sunderland be worried about? Where do you see your match winners and why?
Yeah, I mean, you can't look past Boyce, but there are certainly others. You've mentioned a bit David Templeton, obviously come down from Scotland, one of those signings. I mean, that's another bit of a Clough trademark, to go back to one of your previous questions. That it's a market that he has exploited a lot as a manager, looking up in Scotland for potential sort of hidden gems or good value players, and it's borne a lot of fruit. And David Templeton looks like he could be another one of those. He was one of those problems in pre-season. He got an injury and didn't feature much in pre-season. So the first few weeks of the season, he was lacking in fitness and was a bit part player. But the last few weeks, he's looked brilliant out on the left wing, cutting in and beating his man and having shots at goal. He scored a couple of good goals, and he looks more lively on that left wing with every game. So he's got a bit of an ankle problem from the weekend, so he's not a definite starter. But if he does, he's certainly someone who he'll be one for Sunderland to watch, I think, and he's also forming more of an understanding, it looks, with Boyce up front, and then Scott Fraser in midfield, who also came down from Scotland, from Dundee United in the summer. So they look to be having a little bit of an understanding. And then, as I say, I've sort of picked out Stephen Quinn as well as a pretty crucial performer there in the holding midfield role. I think will play a big part. One sort of a little bit more from left field to look out for. Whether he'll start or not, I don't know. I think he actually might have made his first Burton League start against Sunderland in the home game last season. His name's Joe Sabara. He's a 19-year-old academy graduate, quite a diminutive sort of playmaker, either plays sort of in a bit of a number 10 role or out wide. Got an injury in the win over Doncaster when he was the best player on the pitch at the time. Don't know if he'll start because he's not started the last few because of that injury, but he's one that Burton fans are really, really excited about, and whenever he gets on the ball, you're expecting something to happen. He's quick-footed. He beats his man. So if he does either come off the bench or start, I think he's another one for Sunderland fans to possibly look out for.
You mentioned about Templeton as well. My whole sort of Scottish side of the family is all Rangers. So and I moved up just as they got, I was going to say relegated, but it was basically just avoiding tax, wasn't it? Effectively, they didn't actually get relegated, but Templeton obviously was one of their biggest signings that summer. And our big problem for me, and I think most people would agree, is our right back situation. Matthews has been off colour. Donald Love, lovable but not very good in my opinion. And Templeton obviously on the left-hand side. You mentioned before he scored a couple of good goals. He can really score a scream, and he really does cut in, and he has got pace about him. And he's still quite young. He's still only, 27, 28?
Yeah, 29, I think. But yeah, still in a peak of his career, really.
Yeah, it's his prime, isn't it? And I think I feel like because of where I live and because of my family, I know a little bit more about David Templeton. But for the Sunderland fans who don't, I echo, unfortunately, everything that you say, and that does worry me a little bit, because our right back it's not the strongest of positions, although we do have like three of them. But we actually think Tom Flanagan might play it right back.
Yeah. I was literally just about to say is Flanagan the potential starter there on Saturday, because that is where I spoke about his versatility. He played across the back line for Burton, but that's where he played a hell of a lot for Burton last season a bit as well. He played at left back, so he's certainly played in those full back roles. But I think that would be an interesting battle, to be honest, Templeton and Flanagan. Obviously I've not seen as much of the other Sunderland full backs, but Flanagan I've seen a lot of, and he relishes a bit of a battle. I remember in that first championship season when he was playing at left back in the second half of the season, he was coming up against some of the top wide players or wide forwards in the league. Tom Ince, he had a good battle with him. I think it was Helder Costa for Wolves and a few others. And he came out on top most times. So I'm sure he'd relish the chance, certainly coming back to Burton as well, to try and have a bit of a virtuoso performance at right back, and equally, Templeton, I think would quite relish the chance of coming up against him. But he's, Flanagan's a physical presence as well. He's good in the air and pretty pacey as well. I think he'd have the pace to try and deal with Templeton. So as you say, that could be an interesting battle actually.
I've been quietly impressed by Flanagan. He's only, I think it was like only his first league start. I think I could be wrong with that. Last week, and he came on at right back, but he played most of pre-season at centre half and then got injured. And then obviously we've been playing Louvens and Baldwin. Baldwin's been great. Louvens has been all right. Ozturk's been something different. But I was very impressed by how composed he is. And I would be a lot more confident if he's playing at right back than I will be if Donald Love's playing, for example. And Matthews, again, a player like I don't mind, but he's been off form. So as much as Liam Boyce is kind of the obvious name, I do definitely feel like Templeton, in my experience, and you haven't made me feel any better about it, is the danger man for us on Saturday based on our own weaknesses. But I'm not sure how Saturday is going to go, if I'm honest. I want to win because I don't want to go into a cycle of draws, but I do think a draw is probable. I'm going to go for 1-1, but just to end, what's your prediction and why?
You've stolen mine, to be honest.
That'll do.
One all was going to be mine. I think I emailed a prediction over to Rory. Is it with you guys? And I emailed that one over earlier because that is I think, as you say, Sunderland have already proven that grittiness. I read an interview with John McLaughlin in the week. He talked about, they want to show that they can take the lead and take games away from teams, but also they've shown a grit and a resilience to come back, and that's not going to disappear. So Burton have got to deal with that. But also I think this is a game that Burton will be really up for. They've got a bit of a buzz back, as I said, at the Pirelli. They look creative. They look like they're going to score goals in games. There's not yet been a game this season, perhaps barring Oxford away, where they struggled to create too much. So I can certainly see them scoring. But as you say, Sunderland have found ways back into games. Whether it's going to be Burton who take the lead and then Sunderland who hit back, or Sunderland who take the lead and then Burton reply, I don't know. But I tend to agree with you, and I don't know if a draw would be a bad result for Burton either. Yes, okay, they submitted a lead against Accrington the other day, and so they did quite like to bounce back with a win from drawing that. But equally, they know the quality that Sunderland have got. And Clough, one of Clough's mottos is, if you can't win the game, then don't lose it. He goes on about that all the time. If you can't get the 3 points, make sure you get something from the game. And I think this weekend would be one where, if it's going to be a tough one, then a share of the spoils might not be a bad result.
No, I would take a draw, and it sounds defeatist, but I would take a draw too. Other way around, maybe I'd want 3 points, but I think win your home games, get as many draws or wins away from home, then you should be aiming for promotion, hopefully. So you got to hope, but it's the hope that kills us, isn't it? So the hope we can't stand is the actual turn of phrase I just believe. But I'll where I'm coming from. Yeah. But thanks for coming on, Josh. I hope you have a horrible Saturday. As I always say. But good luck for the season. Obviously, I think touching on Nigel Clough before, he's a Sunderland-born boy, and anyone who's related to Brian, I obviously always want to see do well, as long as it's not at our expense as it was last year. But enjoy the game, and I'm sure we'll catch up with you again when you're back at the Stadium Light. Hopefully, we'll be at the top of the league by that point and well clear of everyone below us. But I don't know if that's going to happen based on the first 7 games of the season. But thanks for coming on, mate. Appreciate it.
No worries. Brilliant. All the best.
All the best, fella. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
So that's the end of the Burton Albion episode, which I'm sure I did plan to do last year, but I think relegation just got the better of me, to be honest. If you want the God's honest truth, but I've enjoyed doing it this season so far. It's been different teams I can speak about, different things we can discuss. But Burton, I feel like I knew a little bit more about because of last season, and I do think it'll be a really tough game on Saturday. I'm a little bit concerned by the past few games. I'm not going to deny that, but like that's because I want us to come into this league and whitewash it, and it's not realistic. We're still unbeaten. We're still showing a gritty determination, which compared to last season, if we went 1-0 down last season, you were waiting for when the second, third, and fourth was going in. This season, that's very much not the case. It's very much like how fast can we pull it back and can we get a win out of it? But we need to stop conceding first. I think I'm stating the obvious, but we need to stop conceding first because it's given us an uphill task. I think a win at Burton would get us back on track and alleviate some of those worries, but it is going to be a tough game. And like I say, I would take a point. But join in, or I think Connor's doing next week actually with a Rochdale fan, because one of his mates is a Rochdale fan, so he's nicked it off me. And although last week I was officially named the 82nd coolest person in Scotland, which is an actual fact, that's in the Herald. I don't know why. Read it yourself. Connor is still actually a little bit more popular than me because friends with the guys upstairs and all that, you know what I mean? But I hope you enjoyed this week. Everyone gave me really good feedback from last week, and I really enjoyed the fact that Rosie just spoke forever and I just shut my mouth. So I've tried to do that again. Sorry if I've opened my mouth too much this week and not let you know too much about Burton, but I feel like I know a lot more than I maybe did sort of an hour ago about Burton, and I'm still just as underconfident about getting a result as I was beforehand as well. But yeah, join me back for whoever we play after Rochdale. I don't remember that. I have a feeling it's Coventry, which I'm sure will be interesting because I'm a Sunderland fan, so I definitely don't like Coventry. So that could be an interesting conversation, but I'll leave you with Connor next week. He's got his Rochdale mate on, and I hope he's not as good as me, and you're kind of clamouring for me back. I'm sure that won't be the case though. Cheers. Bye.